I think I'll start. We have a little bit of housekeeping just to talk about just before we get into the actual course today. It's about the, if my brain could kick in, it's about the project. That's what it's about. So I've extended the due date for the project just because we've been kind of crawling along a little bit. But the good news is that it's allowed me to retool the course a bit in anticipation for next semester, because I'm teaching this class again next semester. Not that, hopefully I don't see any of you there. Hopefully you've passed and you've moved on to the next bit. All right, let's go to projects here. I don't think this is your group, but we'll look at it anyways because I changed them all. So the due date is now December 8th, and it's just the 3 parts. I was going to do a presentation element. I cut that out. So it's just the 3 parts. I will be loading up tests starting next week. Next week, I will load up one big one with probably about 30 questions altogether, which you'll do at your leisure. It'll be open for a while, so just do it when you're ready. And then every week thereafter, I'll try to remember to make sure we have a quiz up. So the idea, I finished the syllabus. I'll post the new syllabus, but it's kind of relevant to you, but it's more relevant to next semester. But I'll post it anyways because the gradables are relevant to you. Basically, what's happening is this project, the 3 portions, will be rated out of 20% instead of the 10%. So there'll be 20% each, totaling 60% altogether, which is what the project was totaled before anyways. Only now you only have the 3 parts to do. And then in addition to that, the quiz will still make up 10%. Ladies, folks, please. The quiz will make up 10% of that mark as well, so that brings it up to 70, which means the final will be worth 30%, which is kind of hefty for a final. But on the same aspect, you managed to escape a midterm, so there has to be a balance there. That being said, it'll be fairly simple. It'll be basically just the stuff we've learned, and then there'll be a practical as well. So the way I usually do, mostly because I'm super lazy, the way I usually do the theory-based part of the quiz or the test for the final, it's the same questions exactly as what's on the quiz. So if you do the quizzes, then the final will be super easy. And that part of it is worth 50% of the final. So 15% should be like super, super easy to get. The last portion is a practical, which I allow you to do in groups. So should be easy. This is a level 1 course. It's a fundamental course, not super stellar that you fully understand it backwards and forwards, but at least somewhat get the concepts of it. So the whole idea of making this super challenging just in order for you to kind of have difficulty with it isn't really in my best interest. Makes more sense to try to see how many of you can actually be successful, so to give you the best tools to make you successful. Also, my quizzes are open book, open internet, which is weird for people, but the whole idea is that the final emulates what you would see in the industry. Now, I'll tell you right now, I've done this 4 times. I've done open industry tests 4 times. And out of 4 times, the success rate on passing that industry final with open internet, open books, and working in groups has been about 70%. People don't prepare because they think they'll be fine, or they think they can rely on somebody to help them, and they find out that, no, that's not the case. It is challenging. The way I usually do the finals, the practical, if I can complete the practical in 30 minutes, you can complete it in 3 hours. That's the way I look at it. That doesn't always work out that way. So we'll see what happens, but just keep in mind that when it comes time for the practical, make sure you go over everything in your notes, study your stuff, rebuild this application a couple of times so you're used to it, that kind of thing, so you know fully what you're doing, so that when you come into the practical, you are able to do the practical. But that's not for weeks. Just keep that in your head, just a kind of a note. What's that? 15. Yep. 15 of the final percent of the final mark, and then the theory base is 15 as well. Yeah. Cool. So I do need to update these marks on here. They're wrong. They will be 2020-20. Other than that, everything else for this stays the same. Obviously, we're not quite at a point where you can even do more than part 1. Part 2, I want to complete part 2 hopefully today. So the actual authentication where we log in and have a logged in account, I'm hoping to reach by the end of this class. Then the edit and update and destroy operations, which are the last 3 pieces of our CRUD. Last 2 pieces of our CRUD. I want to finish for next week. That's the goal. So then after that, the following week after that, we'll look at relationships, which is taking for example, like author and book, right? So you can have an author resource, but then you can have books, and there's many books to an author, but a book only has one author, that kind of thing. So we're going to look at relationships and how to work with relationships. And then the last little bit will be search, sort, and filter and pagination, which we'll learn how to do as well to kind of fill it in, which will probably take 2 classes to get through. That one I'm not so super worried about, but the other ones we got to definitely complete. Any questions about what's going to come up in the next few weeks? No? Cool. I did mean to copy it over. I will copy it over this weekend. For those of you that were interested in the model view controller side of this program, I will publish that so that you can go and look at it if you want to jump ahead and take a look at that particular aspect of this. Right now, it's just a GitHub repo anyways. So what I'll do is I'll just likely stick it under the resources, and you can go look at the GitHub repo. And there's lesson plans in there and everything, so you should be able to read through it and figure out how to actually do it with MVC if you want to. It's not a necessity or a requirement, and it won't show up on a test. Cool. How was everybody's long break? Good? Did you have fun? Get good rest? Yeah? Nice. All right, I'm going to close out of this. We are going to start from where we left off. So if you go to your File Explorer, and we want to navigate to where our COMP-1006 folder is. So COMP-1006, for some of you, if you have XAMPP, it exists in a different location than if you have WAMP, right? If you have WAMP, it's under this PC, your C drive, WAMP64, www, and that's where your COMP-1006 should be. If you have XAMPP, then it's under the C drive, but it's under the XAMPP folder, and it's in an htdocs. The easiest way that I find to navigate to this folder is not navigating through the file system, because what I have noticed is that some of you have WAMP installed a couple of times, and you've removed them, but it hasn't removed the folders, so you wind up getting confused where you're located. The easiest way to get to the folder that is being distributed to the browser is through WAMP itself. So if I close this out and instead open up the WAMP application, so I'm just going to go to Cortana and tell her to open up WAMP. I'm going to click yes, so all of you open up WAMP. Right? We're going for green. Orange, green, yay. I mean, orange is acceptable, but we preferably want green. Now I can click on the little W, and you'll notice one of the options in here is a www directory. Now, if you're in XAMPP, I think in the control panel, there's an option to go to File Explorer. It just says File Explorer. Click on that, and it should open the same directory for you. If you're on MAMP, you're going to, I'm not sure how you get there, but I'm sure you already know how to get there. So we're good anyway. Yeah. All right. So for the rest of you, click on the www directory. That opens the same folder, but it guarantees that we're in the folder that is being distributed to the internet browser. So this is the folder that Apache is delivering all of our HTTP requests through. So we want to go to COMP-1006, right? And then I'm doing lesson 4 Monday. Hopefully you only have one lesson 4 folder, which would just be called lesson 4. I'm going to open my lesson 4 folder. And I can see all my wonderful files in there. Now I want to open this inside my IDE. And I've been finding the easiest way to do this. There's two ways. If you installed Visual Code on the path, if you go to the COMP-1006 directory, you can actually right-click on the directory and choose to open with code, which is kind of handy. If not, what you can do is open up Visual Studio or whatever IDE you're using. I use Visual Studio. Some of you use Sublime. Some are using Atom, which is fine. From what I understand, students have told me that it works in all of them anyways. Grab your lesson 4 folder, and it's kind of this like 2-finger drag thing you got to do on your touchpad. Drag it into the window and drop it. And it will open up your lesson 4 folder in your IDE for you. Or go the long way, file open, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'll walk you through all of that one more time, just so we fully understand it. I'm going to my little W for WAMP. I'm choosing the www directory. I'm going to go into COMP-1006. I'm going to open my IDE. And I'm going to drag my lesson 4 folder onto my IDE, which will open it. Cool. So, last 2 weeks ago, God, it's been so long. 2 weeks ago, we completed a form and submitted data to the backend. And we were able to see it on our create.php page, which, believe it or not, is where the other 2 classes are too. So don't worry, you're not behind. Surprisingly enough, we are not behind. So what I'd like to do is just open up our internet browsers and navigate to our actual page. So we do that by going to localhost /comp-1006 and hit enter. And when we do that, we should see a list of all of our lessons. You should only have 4. Maybe you have some others, but you should only have 4. We're just going to click on our lesson 4 one, which is the most recent lesson we've done. Okay. Now, out of curiosity, I can't remember because it looks like I've got some code modification that's producing this error. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are also getting this error in the top? Okay. So I think the reason we're getting it is because we were talking a little bit about sessions, and we did some stuff with sessions, and we did a redirect from one location to another just to show that the session data persisted. But the problem is now we're hitting the page without the session data. So the variable that we have on there is blowing up because this data does not exist. So instead of going through that, because we're actually going to talk about Superglobals a little bit in depth today, we'll just fix that page so the error doesn't show up anymore. So what I would like you to do, your main index page, which is in the root, not the one under the users folder. That's very important. The main index page, our home page essentially. Go ahead and open that up. And the offending code that we're having issues with is lines 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, if you don't have these lines, I'll zoom in so you can see. Come on. If you don't have those lines, then you don't have to delete anything. But if you do have these 4 lines, session start, echo session name, then delete those 4 lines, okay? Because we don't need them. And then go ahead and save your page. Okay. Once you've saved your page, you should be able to go back to your browser. And you should see the change in your browser when you refresh your page. The error should disappear. So I'll leave that up there. Your page should look like my page. All right, let's talk about some steps that we have to do before we actually go ahead and build out our create script. And we need to deal with a few things. We need to deal with some superglobals. Superglobals. Well, what are superglobals? When we talk about scope with a variable, depending on the language we're working in, there are different, there's a different hierarchy of scope, right? So for example, if we're working in a class-based language and we define, like Java, for example, and we define a variable inside a class or a property or method or a property or field, depending on what you're calling them, the accessibility for that variable is only within that class. It doesn't extend outside of the class. You can't get to it outside of the class, right? JavaScript is kind of interesting because JavaScript actually uses scope modifiers called let and const, which control the visibility a little bit. Kind of like, you can think of them like public and private or protected. You can kind of think, they're not the same though, they're quite different, but you can think of them kind of like that. And what they do is they restrict visibility to a block. So what's a block? A block is easy to see because it looks like this. So think about all the structures that you deal with that use this syntax beside it. So if conditions, while loops, for each loops, do while loops, right? Switch statements, even though you don't actually see this, but you do see it beside the switch. All those things that contain a block, when we define a variable in here, in languages like JavaScript and Ruby and C++ and likely C# as well, and I wouldn't doubt if Java is the same way, you can't access the variable outside of that block. It is only scoped within the block. PHP breaks all of this. PHP is a little bit obnoxious because this variable actually has full vision outside of the block entirely. The only way to make sure a variable in PHP is scoped within a nice defined space is by either putting it in a class, putting it in a function, right? Or building it into a struct. Otherwise, it's not global because I can't access it here. I can only access it here, right? If it was global, it would hoist itself and I'd be able to access it anywhere in the file. It's not global, it's just automatically accessible from here below. And what happens to a lot of brand new PHP developers is they wind up with variable hijacking, which is where you take over this variable somewhere else in your code and accidentally change its value. Mostly not so much because you're necessarily a bad programmer, because you're not. The issue is that the name you decide to give your variable made sense further down in the code. You just didn't realize that you had already done that somewhere else, right? And we're going to hit this problem today. We're going to hit this problem with our password inside our connection script because include files don't scope variables. So if I open up the include file, for example, or sorry, the connect script, we have these 4 variable assignments right here. I have host, DB name, username, and password all right there. Think about all the places we include this connect file, right? We include it in our index file, we include it inside our show file, and we will be including it in our create, our edit, our update, and our destroy. So 6 different locations going to include this connection script. These words, host and DB name, not likely you're going to create a variable called host or DB name, so they're probably okay. You're probably not going to have an issue. However, username and password, very common variable names, and it might be likely that you might at least use one of these, specifically password, when you're trying to create new users or something. So what do? Well, we have a few different options. We can either take all of these variables and rename them with underscores in front of them, which is what some new PHP developers will do. So they'll take each one of these and they'll put an underscore underneath it, which basically means this variable is now reserved, right? it's just, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just syntax. It actually has no meaning whatsoever. There's no value to that. It doesn't actually mean anything. And if you further on call a variable $_password, you will overwrite that value. So is that safe? No, that is not safe variable declaration. Because these are technically configuration values, another option would be, instead of defining them as variables, to change them to constants, because they're not going to change anyways. None of these 4 values will change at any point. And constants are good because constants, once you define them, the value can never change. Have you guys used constants before? How many of you have used a constant before in a programming language? Yeah. So the idea of a constant, it's like a variable. It's a container that holds a value, but the difference between a variable and a constant is that the value can never be changed in a constant. If you attempt to change it, you'll get an error from your application. So that is an option, because what it will do is actually protect our data, right? And stop us from accidentally overwriting it, right? Then we can't accidentally overwrite password. That seems like a fair option to me. The other 2 options are to the far end of the extreme. We could wrap this whole thing in a struct, which is like an object. You can think of it like an object that you don't have to instantiate. It automatically exists in memory. And then you could assign these as properties of that object and then give them values. Based on your confused faces, we're definitely not going down that route. The other option is to wrap it in a class, which you guys are learning object-oriented Java this semester anyway, so you've already probably built a class by this point. And we could define these as methods. We could build a constructor. We could do, no way. That's a sledgehammer for a very tiny bit of code. So what is our last possible solution to encapsulate all of this? Well, like I said before, variables in PHP are either scoped classes, structs, or a very simple structure that we have already used a few times, functions. We could just wrap this in a function, and then anywhere we need to connect, we just call the function. And we'll have it return our connection so that we can just store it. That's the simplest, that's the cleanest way to do it. And it's also the most readable. Yes?
Can we call them global if they are in a function?
Yeah, you can. So, yeah. So what you can do in functions is you can actually define a variable as a global variable and then access it outside the function. Global variables are bad. We don't use global variables. For the same reason why this pattern is bad, because you can accidentally overwrite that global now. So now you have a global variable called password. It's much worse because now it's through the whole system and you can accidentally overwrite it. There is another way. There's the keyword static. And what static will do is it allows you to define a variable once. And then you can keep modifying the value inside of it over and over and over again, but it will remember it after your application changes state. But that's like a whole different level of thinking. Yeah. Easiest way, put it in a function. That's our easiest way. So that's what we're going to do right now. We are going to define a function. So I'm going to come down a little bit from my PHP, and I'm in the underscore connect.php file. That's where we're going, folks. Yeah. If we did it as a class, yes, we could use protected or private or whatever we decided to do that way. And we would probably declare them as private and have the constructor change their value. But I just feel like if we build a class right now, that's going to create more confusion. Yeah, even though the syntax is similar to Java's syntax. All right, so I type in the keyword function. I give my function a name. I'm going to call it connect, because why not? I give it a set of parentheses to hold arguments, but we're not going to give it any arguments. And a set of curly braces. So I started teaching HTML in my local library. And when they asked me, the age range that I wanted to teach, I said, preferably ages 18 to 40. Because if you're 18 to 40, you know how to use your computer, right? And I don't have to teach you how to use your computer. That sounds great. Day one, man with a walker comes in and sits down. His name's Jim, and he's 73. Jim used to code in COBOL, though, like years and years ago, which maybe you guys don't know what COBOL is, but extremely difficult software to program in. So like his skill level is even like, I would say it's beyond mine because of the difficulty he would have had in programming. So we're going through this stuff and we're talking about these wonderful things, and he hasn't seen those before because they're not in COBOL. And he's like, what are those called? And I said, well, I call them braces. He says, well, I call them fancy brackets. So the curly braces are now fancy brackets. That's what we're going to call them, fancy brackets, because I like that term. Or you can call them mustaches. Does any of you know Connor Minley, the tall, long, blonde hair, looks like a Viking? He calls them mustaches. I'm going to call them fancy brackets. So I'd like you to delete the closing fancy bracket, and we're going to go all the way to the bottom of our page on line 25 and create a new line. And we're going to put our closing fancy bracket down there. Ta-da! Congratulations, you created a function. This whole thing is now a function. We have an issue, though. Our function, while will function, it will operate, it will execute, it will invoke, and we won't wind up with an error, has a key problem in a pattern standpoint. This whole thing's going to execute, and then nothing is going to happen because it's not doing something that's super, super important that it needs to do down here. Does anybody want to guess what it is? Exactly. It needs to return something. What should we return? Exactly. We need to return our connection. So let's go to line 25 on the right-hand side of that fancy bracket and hit enter. And we are going to return our connection. So our code still functions the way it did before. We're still going to try this. If it fails, we'll still catch it, echo a problem, and exit. Okay? Otherwise, if everything works and we're golden, then we will return our connection. So now we just have to call our function. So I'm going to scroll to the top just in case some of you, I'm actually going to do some code collapsing so you can see this on one thing here. So that's what the code looks like right now. So we need to take this function and we need to call it everywhere we are currently asking for a connection. And the good news is we're only doing that in 2 files. If we had did this a few weeks from now, we would be doing it in 6 files, right? But now we can get away with doing it in 2 files. So go ahead and save that, Control S to save, right? And then we are going to hit Control P on our keyboard to pop up our little finder, or you can just do it through your sidebar. And I want to open up users index. So users index is what I'm opening, this file. And I want to go to the very top of the file. On line 13 or thereabouts, you can see that we've included our connection script. We are assuming that all of the information that is inside that script gets copied and pasted into our file. And because we were assuming that, we were using this variable even though we didn't define it inside this file because we had defined it in the connect file. So this is definitely going to improve our readability because now we don't just have some random variable called con that seems like it came out of nowhere, right? Now we're actually going to define it itself. Yes?
I don't have the core.
You don't have what?
No. I don't know, it's just me.
Let's see what you have. You don't have most of this file. What file is that? Oh no, you're in the wrong file, that's why. Users, so go to users, index.php. That file.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry, totally fine. So yeah, users index.php, not the root index.php. Good? Awesome. So we're going to go find the line where it says include root.includes underscore connect.php. We're going to put our cursor on the end of it, and we're going to hit enter. And now we are going to create our connection variable that's going to get used here. And it's very easy to do. We type in the name of the variable, and we say it's equal to, and then we just call the function we just created, which is called connect with the brackets. There we go. We've called our function. It's going to return the connection, and we're going to store it in this variable, and then the rest of our script will just work because it was already using that variable anyways. Make sure you save. Now we're ready to go make sure it's still working and that everything is still functioning inside our application. Is anybody still typing that out before I switch pages? No? All right. Let's open up our browser. You should have this open. Go to users using the navigation and click on view all users. And you should see a page full of wonderful users and no errors. Good. Now click one of those users. Any user, don't care which one, go ahead and click one of them. And now you will see errors. The error is actually not that hard to read. Undefined variable con. That's because, again, we're including that connection script, and that file is currently assuming that inside the connection script there's a variable called con that has been defined. But we wrap the thing in a function, which changed its variable visibility. So, back to our IDE, let's go fix this page. We're going to open up users show.php. So users show.php, which looks like this. So sure enough, we're including our connection script. We can see where we're using con. This not so good, right? We got to fix this. So right after our include once, we'll type in $con equals connect and the brackets. And then we'll save. And there's our connections. Then feel free to go back to your browser and refresh that page with the error, and the error should go away. Ta-da! It's the derpy pig. Yes. Do yours have an error still? You have a forbidden. That's a bit different. So you see this, how it's going to base path, blah, 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 blah. That needs an equals right after that question mark wherever you wrote that line. I'm guessing you wrote that line in your index file. Make sure you do that with all of your links. So all of those should look like, which is the shorthand version of echo, basically. Okay. So variable visibility is a good topic and kind of allows us to segue into something called superglobals. Superglobals are kind of neat. We were just talking about global variables a little bit. Superglobals are like safe global variables that we can use because they're used for specific things, right? And we have 3 common ones that we'll use in this class. There is a 4th one that you may wind up using when you go out into the industry, if you wind up working in a firm that does PHP. There is a 4th one called cookies, but we're not going to use cookies in this class. We're going to use get, post, and session. So these three. I'm going to draw little boxes and we'll cover each one. So get, post, and session. So these three superglobals we're going to work with right now. All right. I'm going to close off these files. And I'm going to open my file side here. And I'm going to create a new file. Right here under index, I'm just going to say new file, right click and click new file. And call it superglobals.php. And I'd like you to do the same thing. Create a file called superglobals.php. Not inside any folder, just like inside the root. So this is our root. It should be in line with index, contact, and about. Same level. Yeah? You have an error? Undefined variable con. So if you go to your IDE, I have a funny feeling you're not calling your connection script. Scroll to the very top of your page. Yep, keep going. Very top. So right after this line, hit enter, and it's $con equals connect. Yeah, the function. There you go. And then save it. And now go refresh your page. All good. And if you click on a person, should have the, oh, no, you've got that one already. Okay, cool. All right. So if you haven't already, make sure you create this file, superglobals.php. It's in line with our index file. The reason why we're creating an entirely separate file from our application is because I want to show you in a very simple way how superglobals work. That way it's easy for you to understand because they are kind of a complicated thing. Like they're not very simplistic. All right. Make sure you open your superglobals.php page. And we're going to start off our PHP file with PHP. And we'll close it down here. So PHP uses superglobals, which are global variables defined at runtime. So when the application actually executes, on every single page, these variables get defined. And they are available to the entirety of your application, which means you can access these variables absolutely everywhere. The values inside, though, may not always be predictable. They work in different ways, though. So, for example, get and post will hold your query parameters, but will only live for one complete request. So they will only live from where you created them to the next location. And then you can use them, but after you leave that page, they die, they disappear. Whereas session is permanent. Session will live for the lifespan of the session of your application, which is a little bit different. Let's take a look at what get and post do. Let's create a get super variable first. So up here inside our PHP, we're going to var dump $_get. I'll just write a comment above it. Oops. Our get super global values. There we go. So we're going to var dump our get. So get is a PHP array and will contain a bunch of keys and values that we've set inside of it. Currently, it's empty, and we can see that if we go to our browser. Let's back up so we're just at lesson 4, and we'll go to the superglobals.php page. So right after lesson 4, go to superglobals.php. And you should see a big array, size 0, and it's empty. So what PHP does with get, PHP takes a look at your query parameters and then passes them into the get superglobal as keys and values. Now, obviously, I don't expect you to know what a query parameter is yet, so why don't we create one? So let's jump back to our ID. And down below here, we're going to do something very, very naughty. We're going to write HTML without a doc type or an HTML body. We're just going to write a very basic anchor tag. So anchor tags have an A, right? They have a href or an href, and they have a label, right? I'm going to call this query param. And what we'll do, we'll reference this page. So we'll go to superglobals.php. Why don't we add the / in front of it so it looks a little more normal? Okay, so that's the first part of our URL. And now I'm going to add some query parameters. And the way the query parameters work is you have the key and the value. We tell the browser that this is a query parameter by adding a question mark in front of it. When we want to add more, we add an ampersand and then a new key and a new value. And we keep doing that for as many keys and values as we need. So, in Codeland, hold on, let me collapse this. Increase a little bit. There we go. In Codeland, this looks like this. Here's the question mark. That tells the browser that we're creating query parameters. Then our key, so I'm going to say name for this key, equals, and I'm going to say my first name. If I want to put a space in there, I can, and the browser will autofill the space with an HTML character code. Space is actually %20. That's what it works out for query parameters when they're encoded. I want to add my age, so I'm going to put an ampersand in there to say that I want a new set of query parameters. And I'm going to do age equals 40. And then I'll add one more, and color equals blue. So I have 3 query parameters in total. I have a name, an age, and a color. Name's value is Sean, age's value is 40, and the color's value is blue. Go ahead and save that. Now what will happen is when we click that link, it should go right back to our Superglobals page. It will add this data to the end of the URL, which is totally fine. PHP will take that data and very nicely for us extract these as keys for the array and these as values for the array and automatically build out this array called get. So let's take a look at that. Is anybody still typing that out? I don't want to leave anybody behind on this. Okay. Go to our browser. hit refresh. There's our link, query params. If you hover over it, you can see the URL at the bottom here. Okay. Go ahead and click it. And there we go. If you look at the URL in the address bar, you can see all the query parameters, but you'll also see that PHP has extracted each of the keys and made them the array keys, and extracted each of the values and made them the array values. That works for one request, and we just finished our request. If we were to navigate back to the Superglobals without the rest of that array, or without the rest of that query parameter, so I'm going to just take it right off, all the way up to the question mark, and hit enter, and you'll notice now it's empty, because it only lives for one request cycle. So query parameters are very easy to use. However, they're generally only used for very simple reading operations, because we don't necessarily want to put sensitive data up there, because somebody over your shoulder could easily see your sensitive data. So we don't generally use query parameters for sensitive data. What we do instead is we like to use post, but don't let post fool you. Post isn't any more secure. It's more security by obscurity, which means if somebody walks up behind you and looks at your computer as you're typing your stuff in, like for your password, for example, the form will have the little dots, right? So you can't see the password. And when you submit, instead of it winding up in the URL, it goes through a message body on the post body, which means the person behind you can't just see it. But anybody listening to that traffic in between can definitely pick it up. There's no reason why they can't. It's not protected. So let's create a little form. And I mean a super simple form. We're going to create the word form, right? Set of tags. And we'll add 2 inputs. Oops, I wrote 3 accidentally. We're going to add 2 inputs. And maybe we'll put a break tag between them just so it splits them apart. Now, maybe you might remember from 2 weeks ago, but if I submit this form, it is super important that I have one specific attribute in my input. Does anybody remember what attribute I have to have in order for PHP to be able to use the data from the form? Ampersand, no. Name, right, name. Definitely need the name. Because the name is what PHP is going to use as a key. So I'm going to write first name, and then the next one will be last name. So yeah, at the bare minimum, a form has to have the name attribute, and you have to give them values, because that's what PHP is going to use in order to create the keys. And then it probably wouldn't hurt to have a submit button, right? And we can write it in 2 different ways. We'll write it the nice approved HTML5 way. Actually create a button. And there we go. We have our very, very basic form. Now, when I submit this form, it's going to do something interesting. Because I haven't given the form an action, does anybody know where the form will go? Where will the form data go if I don't give it an action? Yep. If you put an action in, right, the form data goes to where the action is. But if I leave it out, where does the form data go? Self, exactly. It goes back to itself. If I don't put a method in, what is the default HTTP method it uses? Is it get or is it post? It's get, exactly. So let's just leave this the way it is, right? We'll jump over to our browser. I don't know why I opened a new one. Go. We'll refresh so our form shows up. Be nice if we had labels, but we don't. Whatever. Sean McKinnon, right? Now, if I click submit, what's going to happen is it's going to take Sean and McKinnon, and it's going to submit it back to itself as get parameters, which means this var dump of the get superglobal should actually show those values in it. And sure enough, it does. But you'll notice one other thing it did. Look at your URL. Your URL changed. You now have the question mark, first name equals Sean, ampersand, last name equals McKinnon. It created the get parameters for you as well. Now, obviously, that isn't doing what we were saying. It's not giving us security by obscurity. So I'm going to delete those parameters in my URL and hit enter and go back to my page. So now my get is empty and my post is empty. I'm going to go over to my IDE and I'm going to make one modification to my form. I'm going to change its method to equal post. So now the method is post, which means now all of this stuff will be converted to keys and values and sent through the post body. So how do we access it? Well, to access get parameters, we use $_get. To access post parameters, we do var dump $_post. So get parameters is with $_get. Post parameters are with $_post. So now what will happen is all of our post data will head off to this link, and we should see it when we spit out the array that PHP creates for us. After this, we'll do sessions, and then we'll take a break. All right, anybody still typing that out, or am I good to switch? Okay, I'll give you a second. And I'll show you that the same thing happens with post. The values only last for one request. The second we have a next request, they disappear. But something weird happens with forms submitted by post. If you refresh the page, it will actually ask you to confirm you want to repost your values. Haiti, we good to switch? Okay. Jump back over to the browser. We'll refresh. Now we can see we have two empty arrays. Go ahead and fill out the form. So Sean McKinnon, and click submit. So now you'll notice that our post superglobals are posting. We have no query parameters inside our URL, but we can see our values. Go ahead and click refresh on your page, and you'll get a little notification that pops up that says confirm form resubmission. The page you're looking for used information that you entered. Returning to the page may cause any action you took to be repeated. Do you want to continue? So if you click continue, nothing changes on the page because all that data just got resubmitted to the page. This is actually a common problem that new developers experience, where they take query information from a user, they create a new resource, but the user can hit resubmit and create the resource again and again and again accidentally, and they can wind up with multiple duplicates of this resource being created. So what we do is we take advantage of the fact that post and get only live for one life cycle, and we redirect them. That made the data is dead. It's gone. It can't be redone, right? So how can we resubmit, or how can we redirect? If we click on the query parameters link here, we'll see our query parameters, but you'll notice our post parameters are now empty because their life cycle is over. They have died. So that's fine for get parameters and query parameters, but what if you need something to live a little longer? What if a user logs in and you want to be able to keep them logged in for the whole cycle of while they're in your application? Get and post are definitely not okay for that. They are not the thing you want to use. Post, especially because posts can only be created through the form body, which means you would have to literally get them to resubmit their login details on every single page they want to go to. They're going to get quite mad at you after a while. Get is not very secure if you're passing around the user credential login everywhere you go, because somebody could just look over their shoulder, write it out, and then resume as them, right? So we need some sort of variable where we can store something privately, but maintain it through the entire life cycle of the application. And we do. We have something called sessions. Sessions are not unique to PHP. Sessions exist in all programming languages. And in fact, the second you go to your browser, you wind up with a session. That's how what I'm looking at inside my internet browser is not the same as what you're looking at in your internet browser. We are not getting the same stuff. That's because we both have different sessions. So we can look at different things. Has anybody here heard of session hijacking? Session hijacking is where a hacker actually takes your session and becomes you, and now has your session. So your Amazon cart that's full of stuff, they can see those details. Your credit cards that you have on file, they can see those details. They can go become you and act as you because they've assumed your session. So sessions, you need to be cautious. You don't want to put very sensitive data in sessions. No passwords. Don't store passwords in a session. And the type of login type stuff we're going to do in this class is going to be fairly basic. There is a whole website called OWASP, which I recommend if you plan on doing any web development. The OWASP Foundation is just owasp.org. This is a whole website devoted to online security and how to protect your applications from hackers, from SQL injection, cross-site scripting, session hijacking, any of that type of stuff, even exploits against Linux or exploits against Windows or exploits against Mac that may cause your server some issues. You can actually look at this site and it will tell you not only what those are, how to recognize them, how to tell if you're currently being attacked, but also how to stop the attack. So it gives you a lot of information. That is a handy site to have in your tool bag of tricks when you go out into co-op. Okay, just keep that in mind. OWASP. I'll also put it as a resource inside our link. Okay, let's create a session. Sorry, let's access the session. The session is already there. So in order to access the session, we have to do a couple of things. We have to actually tell PHP we want to use the session. So we start a session. It's kind of a weird word because it means to resume the session more so than it does mean to start it, but that's just what they've used. So let's hit enter a couple of times and access session. So let's do that in capital letters. Session Superglobal. And we're going to be a little tricky here. So the first thing we're going to do is start our session. So session, start. That will resume our session for us. That says to PHP, I want to access the session and I want to use it because I plan on doing stuff with it. And then we're going to write our first session variable, which is the same as the rest of these, $_ session. And then we just give it a key name, whatever key name you want. I'm going to say my super global session. equals gobbledygook. There you go. I created a session key. So this is these are just arrays. These are just PHP arrays. I gave it a key, and then I gave it a value, right? Do the same thing over here. So this is the session array, right? Just like post and get, just like any array. There's the key, there's the value. So let's go ahead and do a var dump, and we'll var dump out session so that we can see what's currently inside of it. So var dump, not with a T, $_ session, and save. So once again, we start the session so we can access the session variable and use that. If we don't start the session and we start trying to write to the session variable or access the session variable, PHP will blow up and tell you you have no access to this. You have to start the session and then var dumping the session. In fact, it's so important that we start the session. I'm going to write a comment beside it in all capital letters saying super important. Don't forget. There. It's very, very important you start the session. All right, go ahead and save that page. Control S on your keyboard. Jump over to your internet browser, hit refresh, and you can see my Superglobals session with the gobbledygook value inside of it. So that's not very fun, right? So what? If I hit refresh, who cares? You're defining it. You're literally assigning it every time you refresh. What does that show me? That doesn't show me anything. It doesn't show me squat. I want to see where you leave the page, assign values to it, and they still are there when you go to another page. So let's do that next. The easiest way to do that would be to take the get values and assign them to the session values. And then when we leave the get page, if session works the same way as get and post, they should just go away, right? So let's do that. We'll just go $_session equals $_get. So literally just take whatever values are inside get and assign them over to session. And then go ahead and save. So for those of you that just checked in, we're just taking the get values and assigning them over to the session values. So now if you jump back to your browser, we're actually not going to see anything. Hold on, let's go back to our IDE. We need to duplicate this line. We're going to move it down. If you just put your cursor next to it, hold Alt and press down, it will jump down the line. Or you can copy and paste it down a line. Just make sure it's after the 2 session assignments. So now we'll just dump everything that's inside session, essentially. All right. Jump over to your browser, hit refresh, and what you'll notice right now is we have name, age, and color, and you might be like, well, where's this coming from? If you look up, it's coming from here where we set these query parameters, right? So these query parameters, get picks it up, and then get shoved them into session. If we remove those from our URL, so we're only going to superglobals.php, nothing else after the PHP part, right? If I hit enter, get will clear, and then we shouldn't see anything inside the super session, right? It should be clear as well. And it is. Of course it is. I'm being silly. Hold on. Because we literally just reassigned get to it, so of course it is. We want to use... Let's change this a little bit. We're going to do get or session. That's better. what that will basically do is if get is empty, then session should immediately take over. Oh, will that work like that actually? Because get is technically an array and not actually undefined. So that might not do what I think it's going to do. So the idea is that if this is false, null, or undefined, then it will automatically take this value. But this is not false, null, or undefined. This is technically an array, which is a value, which is a proper value. So chances are it will get assigned. We might need to actually write something called a ternary. So what a ternary looks like, you look for a condition. You ask if the condition is there. You provide a true, or you provide a false return. That's a ternary. So once again, condition, ask if the condition is true. If it's true, return whatever is on this side of the colon. Otherwise, return whatever is on this side of the colon. I'll do the same over here. Ask if the condition is true with the question mark operator. Return this side of the colon if it is true. Otherwise, return the right-hand side of the colon. How many of you have written a ternary before? No? Is that brand new? You guys have never seen that syntax before? Is that available in Java? I wonder if that's available in Java, if you can write a ternary in Java. You can write it in C++ and C, so I'm assuming you must be able to write it in Java. It's like writing if else, but without all the extra garbage, right? All right, so go ahead and save that. So essentially what will happen, now that we've got this right, is if get has any data inside of it, it will get assigned a session. If there's nothing inside of it, we'll just reassign session back to itself. So if session is empty, it will be empty regardless. If session is not empty, we will see some data. So let's go play around with this and test it. So right now we're on our basic Superglobals page. Everybody should be empty except for our gobbledygook, which means our thing is working. It's actually working properly because we just reassigned back session, right? If you hit refresh, gobbledygook's still there. No worries. Click query params. Now, all of this data is sitting inside of our session data. If we get rid of the query parameters on our string and go back to Superglobals, we should see gobbledygook get returned because it gets reassigned, and we should see these three values. Actually, no, we won't see gobbledygook because we'll wind up over. No, will we? I have a funny feeling I just goofed myself up, actually. Hold on. I think we have to make one more small edit. Nope, it worked. Yep, it worked. So there we go. There's our three values that were defined, but notice get is now empty. And we have my Superglobal session. So what does this prove? This proves that that session exists and those values will exist forever. And I can prove it even a little further. Close my tab. Application's done. We're out. We left, right? But sessions are kind of a weird beast. Sessions will persist for the length of the time that the application is open. So as long as Chrome is open and you don't close Chrome, you will still have access to your session variables. So I'll jump back in, go back to localhost, COMP-1006, my Superglobals file. My session variables are still there. So if I use this to show that whether or not I was logged in, I would still technically be logged in. How do I get rid of them completely? Close the browser entirely. Now I'll go back to my browser. As soon as this thing catches up, comp. Stop. There we go. Superglobals. And now it's empty. All of those get parameters that were in there before are now gone. That's because the session is finally gone. The second I open the browser, I get a brand new session that I can now work with and do whatever it is I need to do with my new session. And we can see it's still working. If I go to query params, jump back and refresh, you can see it's still working just fine. So Superglobals, super important to understand how they work. I recommend playing with them until you fully understand how Superglobals work, because they will make your life very easy, okay? Yeah, why don't we take a 15-minute break, get some water, get some food, get whatever you want, and then when you come back, we'll finish writing our create script so that we can actually create a user. 1 second, I'll come help. 1 second. Do you have any project questions after this? I might be able to help you with some project questions. But let's see if we can get our create script done. So last week, or sorry, not last week, 3 weeks ago, a long time ago, we got to, let me zoom out to a normal level. We got to this point where we had created a form. So if you click on register, you should be able to get to your form, right? And I think all we did was make it that if you submit this, it uses post, right? Uses that post variable, takes our form details, puts them inside the post variable, and sends it off to our create.php file. So go ahead and fill this out. Notice when you put in your email address, it creates a new little face. There we go. Type in a password and click submit. Good? And then when it goes there, you should get to this page that shows all of your post data that you submitted. That's where we finished 2 weeks ago. So now we're going to write the stuff that actually goes through this and does some key steps. We are going to validate, which means we're going to verify that the information they gave us is accurate and what we're expecting. We're going to sanitize, which means we're going to go through each of the strings that you see here, like Sean and McKinnon, and we're going to strip any characters out of it that might be script characters, like from JavaScript or VB script. We're going to strip all that stuff out of it. And we're going to normalize, which means anything that needs to be lowercase will lowercase so that it always looks the same, because users are kind of interesting people. Like when I write my name, I write it with a capital S and then all lowercase letters, and I write my last name with the capital M and a lowercase c and a capital K, because that's how Scottish people write their last names. And then my email address, I do Sean.McKinnon, right? But it's all in lowercase format. If you get some people, like a senior citizen, for example, they pretty much have glued their caps lock key down. And so all of this will be in capital letters, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? But by normalizing your data, you ensure that all the data in the system looks the same. And it's kind of important because computers are very literal, right? They treat everything literally. So a capital S and a lowercase s are not the same thing to a computer. Those two things are very different, right? And because of that, if I want to match all users with the name Sean in my database, and I've got users who have capitalized the name Sean and lowercase the name Sean, it's going to be a lot harder for me to figure out who is in the system properly, and I might miss people because of the way they've titled their words, right? So what's better is to actually normalize this data and store it in my database normalized. So validation, sanitization, normalization, 3 steps that we need to consider anytime we're actually creating a new piece of resource, whether it's a user or anything for that matter. All right. That's going to be hard to do right now. Let's go to One second, I'm just trying to find the scripts actually for this. All right, step one for inserting our new users. So now that we have a basic understanding of validation, sanitization, and normalization, we are ready to build our create script. So this will be the action responsible for inserting a new user into our database using the credentials submitted by the user. So hopefully they submit a better password than ASDF. We can put this code into our form page, but it's better to separate the code by its convention. So old school PHP developers would take their create PHP stuff and they would actually put it right directly in the form page, and then they would post the form back to itself. And they would detect that the get post or this post, that the post Superglobal has data in it, and then they would deal with it. That's gross. It's so gross. Don't do that. That's so gross. It's better to keep these things separated. Keep our form in its own place. Keep the action script in its own place, and keep them nicely separated. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we did, actually. Let's open up our create PHP file. There we go. It's big and scary and empty. So we've got our include config file, which is the thing that normalizes our paths. And somebody did point out that we haven't actually done this everywhere. We will do some cleanup maybe at the beginning of class next week, where we make sure that that's everywhere. And this is the thing responsible for why we can see our username, our password, our first name and last name, our email address. This is what's currently showing us that information. It's spitting out the post Superglobal so we can see that data. So we're going to remove that. So go ahead and just remove that var dump or comment it out, your choice. I'm going to remove it. And our first step is to create a message system. So a message system, what's that all about? Well, that's how we're going to communicate with our user, because our user isn't going to understand error messages. And actually, when we deploy our PHP code, if we deploy it into production, we usually turn error handling off so that users can't see errors. We handle them ourselves. We do try catches and we log them out to a log file. We don't let users see errors. It's super important. So we need some way to be able to communicate with the user and say to them, hey, you did something wrong, right? Plus, not to mention, not all errors error. Sometimes they're logic errors, right, where you don't actually get an error at all because there's no error. There's nothing wrong. It's just something you goofed up on. But often it's things like validation, right? The user submitted some data that wasn't correct, so we need to now tell them that the data they submitted wasn't correct. So that's what we're going to do. Create a message system. Well, this sounds more sophisticated than it actually is. We're going to create a variable called errors, and we're going to make it equal to an empty array. Create a message system. Now, because post and get will only live for one complete life cycle of a request, I can't unfortunately use those in this particular scenario, because I'm going to redirect when the user lands to this page and they've submitted their user and I add them to the database. My next step is to redirect them so they don't accidentally hit refresh and create another version of themselves, right? So in order to do that, I need to be able to send them messages, but I can't send them via get or post, because get and post die the second I do that redirect. The second I do that redirect, any data I put inside those things is gone. That's it. It's history, right? I could add it to the end of the header link that I send to, but that would be kind of goofy. I mean, I want it to persist, so maybe the best place for me to put that stuff, sessions, right? They're beautiful. They persist. I don't have to worry about them. So I think that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to shove it right in the session variable. But number one step with a session variable is to start the session. Yes. Start the session. However, that's grand, but we're going to wind up with a certain issue. Later on, we're actually going to attach the session start inside this config file, which means I'll be starting the session there and potentially starting the session further in my page. You, believe it or not, cannot call session start more than once. If you call it more than once, it will cause an error. So I'll show you that. I'm going to hit Alt-Shift, press down to create a second copy of that. So now I've got 2 session starts. And then I'm going to go over to my page where I submitted my form, and I'm going to click refresh. So I've got 2 session starts. If you find yourself typing session start out twice, you need to learn how your IDE does duplication, because that would make your life a lot easier. If you're in Sublime, it might be Control-Shift-D. If you're in Atom, I think it's also Control-Shift-D. If you're in Brackets, I think it's Control-Shift-D. I think only Visual Studio Code is Alt-Shift-Down or Alt-Shift-Up. All right, so now that I've got that, I'm going to jump over to my browser. I'm going to hit refresh, and I'm going to say, yes, continue. What's that? Alt-Shift-Down. Yes. For which application? Yes, Visual Studio Code. Yep. Hit continue, and bam, got an error. Notice, session starts. A session had already been started. It says it's ignoring it, but it's not ignoring it because we got a stupid error. So, what does that tell me? It tells me that somewhere in my code, I have called session start more than once. So how do we get around that? Well, the way we get around that is by checking to see if the session has already started. And the way we do that, we're going to type a nice little conditional statement in front of it. We're going to say if session status, which will tell me the status of the session, equals one of these predefined constants that come with PHP when PHP boots. This one is called PHP underscore session none. So what this says, if the session status is equal to PHP session none, meaning there is no session, then go ahead and start it. That's what that means. Go ahead and save that. Jump back to your page and refresh, and the big error will disappear. Now, we intentionally caused this error, but what happens quite often is this error happens accidentally. We start putting session starts in different files, and we start including those files and forgetting that we have put session starts in them, and we wind up with that error where the session has already been started and we wind up with it blowing up. So it's super important that we write our session starts using this syntax because it helps us avoid that issue. All right. Now, if you jump back to your browser, hit refresh, continue, the error goes away because, yes, the session is started, but the next time we check to see if it was started and there was no reason for us to start it. So we're going to get rid of one of these 2 lines. We're going to get rid of line 8 and keep the good one. That is the good syntax for it. Maybe write a comment above it. Let's write a comment above it saying, Sean says, this is the good syntax. There you go. All right, so we have if session status equals PHP session start. Cool. So we got a started session, Sean. What are we going to do with it? Well, folks, we're going to create something called a Flash messaging system. Sounds super complicated. Sounds very cool, like the Flash, right? But what it really is, a Flash messaging system stands for this. Flash, meaning I show you the message. If you leave the page or close the message, I won't show you the message again. That's what Flash means. It's Flash. Happens once, right? And then messaging or notifications is a way for us to communicate, right? So we're going to create a Flash messaging system which allows us to communicate with the user on the front end. So how do I create my Flash messaging system? Super easy. On this side, all we need is to create a new session key called Flash. I mean, you could call it notifications, you could call it messages. It really doesn't matter what you call it, but I'm going to call it Flash equals an empty array. I'm going to give it an empty array. And then each of our Flash messages that we shove inside of it are going to have a type, and they're going to have an actual message. And you'll be able to store as many messages in there as you want. All right, so there's my Flash message system. I think I'm having a stroke. All right, validation will ensure the user enters in our required fields and in the required format. That is true. Validation is to make sure that they give us the data we want in the format we are expecting it in. And if they don't, we're going to send them some errors saying, hey, smarten up. All right, so our first step, which is not on here. Yes? Is what? 3 equals means not only are you equal to, you are also the data type I expect you to be. So is equal to and the correct data type is what 3 equals means. 2 equals is a loose equals, which means, like for example, that is true. That is true. And the reason why it's true is because both those values are equal to each other. That's completely true. However, add one more equals, and that is false. Because that is a number, an integer, and that is a string. So while the values are the same, the two data types are wrong. So 3 equals is strict equals. That's what it means, strictly equals. Cool. All right, so step 3, add on any errors. That's wrong. Verify the fields aren't empty using a thing. I did step 3 already. I just put it in the wrong spot. All right, I need to scroll up a little bit. Is anybody still typing the code that's there? Because I need to scroll up. No? Eddie, are you still typing? Are you good? All right, I'm going to scroll down a little bit to step 2. Verify the fields aren't empty. And because Sean is super lazy, use a for each loop so you don't have to write the same code over and over and over again. So that's what we're going to do. First, we're going to say what fields have to actually contain information. I'll make it easy on you. It is all of them. They all have to have data. So I'm going to create a variable called required. Why did I do this? This is literally the most asinine redundant code I've ever written in my life. There must have been a reason. There is no reason. This is stupid. All right, I'll show you both ways. So we can do required equals, and then we can type out each field that was in our form. But here's why this is dumb. I already have access to something that already has all of those keys in it right now without having to create a whole brand new array with those field names in it. Does anybody know what it is? Contains all of those field names already. Exactly. Spot on. Post. Post already has those as keys. I'm just being redundant, right? So I don't need that. There's no reason to create this extra thing for no reason whatsoever. Instead, let's get rid of that guy, or just comment it out. I'll comment it out. Instead, we'll just make a little beefier of a for each loop. I'm going to make a for each loop that looks at post as the field and the value. So we're going to look at the field name and the value. So what this does essentially is it takes the post array and it puts the key inside this column and it puts the value inside that column. And don't put a semicolon at the end of it. We still need it. So we need to put it on 2 lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if the value is empty. If, and the good thing is, PHP gives us a handy tool for checking that. It's called empty. A function. So we're going to say if empty value then we're going to create a new error. But I don't want to say to my user, first underscore name can't be empty because that's not user friendly and the underscore may freak them out. They may not understand what the underscore is supposed to mean. So I want to make sure it's formatted in a nice, clean, easy to understand way. So in order to do that, I have to actually normalize that name a little bit. And the easiest way to do that is using some functions that are built into PHP. So I'm going to write formatted equals. So I'm going to create a variable. And I'm going to create, here's the function UC first, which will take the first letter of the string and capitalize it. So UC first. And then I'm going to put a function inside there. So I'm going to nest another function called string replace. And then inside string replace, I'm going to write the arguments that are in here, which are look for an underscore, replace it with a space inside the field value. So it's going to take field. It's going to look for the underscore in field. So first underscore name. It's going to find this underscore. It's going to replace it with a space. Then that value is going to get returned to UC first, which is going to capitalize the F. So the first one will be first with a capital letter, name. Second one will be last with a capital letter, name, and so on and so forth. Nicely formatted. Nested functions tend to throw people off. We could have done this in 2 separate lines. Actually, let's do that because I just don't want to confuse everybody. So we'll just do this twice. Just going to take this right out of here. Put it on this line. You can leave yours the way it is if you understand what it's doing. Otherwise, separate it as 2 separated things. It's a little cleaner to read that way as well. You know that this did the replacement, then you know that you're capitalizing that one. So makes it easier. All right, so the last step is to actually add the error. So we can do this in 2 different ways. We can do push in PHP. Pushing is taking an array. So here's my array. Pushing is taking a value and shoving it into the array. And every time you do that, it will go to the end of the array and add a new thing to the end of it. That's called pushing. Do you have push in Java? No? No push? How do you add new things to a list in Java? Or can you not add new things to a list? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. C++ is kind of like that too. You have to use vectors instead of lists, which is kind of annoying. Anyways, PHP, nice and easy. You have push. So all we have to do is access errors that we defined before. Dot, sorry, not dot. That's not even the right language. Array underscore push. I was about to write JavaScript. It's a function, which is really annoying. So first you give it the array you want to push into, and then the value you want to push into the array, which is, we'll use string interpolation here. Formatted cannot be empty with an exclamation mark. There we go. So what will happen is the first time this goes through, if first name is empty, it will say first name cannot be empty and shove it into the array. And it will do that for last name, email, password, and password confirmation. So if all 5 fields are empty, all 5 fields will create an error message, and all 5 fields will be, all 5 error messages will be shoved into the array. And we'll see all 5 error messages. All right, so I don't really like the way this is written. I find this kind of annoying. So I'm going to copy this, my error message. I'm just going to copy it with Control C. And then I'm going to comment out this line. I'm going to write it in shorthand, which is errors with a set of square brackets equals the error message. I find that is easier to understand than the one above. I like this format better than that format. But you can use whichever format you choose. So you can either use array underscore push, which is a function call, or you can use the shorthand. But both are there for your use. All right. So this is just checking to see which fields are empty. I also want to check and make sure that the email is in the correct format. So the email needs to be, now the correct format means you've given me a symbol at the beginning, so like your name or something like that. You have the @ symbol in there, right? A domain, and an extension. So you need those 4 pieces. So you need Sean.McKinnon, right? That's the symbol part. You need the @ right? Then you need the domain, which is Georgian College, and then the extension, which is .ca. Those 4 pieces have to exist in an email. And the cool thing is that PHP actually gives us a very easy way to check if the email is formatted correctly. We don't have to like dive into learning regex or anything like that to figure it out. It already has it built in. So we basically just go if exclamation mark, which means the opposite of whatever the condition is, right? It's the not operator. If not, filter var, sounds like Shakespeare. Filter var, $_post email, comma, and then a predefined filter check, which is, we're going to use the validate email check. So if filter var, so basically if the email doesn't validate, that's what that not sign is turning around, because what will happen is this thing will either say false or true. So if this does not validate, it will come back as false. The not operator obviously converts that to true, and then whatever we put inside here will execute. So obviously we want to add error if that's the case. Just going to go to the next line and tab in, just so it's all on errors, square brackets equals your password. Nope, that's not it. Your email is not in a valid format. Maybe I'll add some braces just so I don't freak you out. Some fancy brackets. So when we want to validate the format of something, there's a whole bunch of them built in. And if you look at the lesson plan, there's a whole thing that talks about each of the validation options that are available. But if you want to validate something, those validators are really handy because they're basically predefined regular expressions so that you don't have to know the regular expression. There's one for checking email. There's one for checking URLs. There's one for checking IP address formats, stuff like that. Not a very exciting thing in the world. The email one is pretty handy though. All right, next thing, I want to verify that the password and password confirmations match, right? So a lot of times when somebody submits a form for user registration, you get them to type their password out twice, so that way it's a guarantee that whatever they typed as their password is correct, right? It's in the correct format, it's in the correct text, everything matches. So we're going to do the same thing, and the cool thing is you don't need any special validators or anything like that. It's just a basic condition check. It's just if $_post password is strictly equal to, not strictly equal to, the opposite of those things, post password confirmation. So basically, if these two things don't equal each other, then let's add another error. Your password and password confirmation must match. Nope. So we're checking to see if the fields are empty. If they are, we add an error. We're checking to see if the email is in a valid format. If it isn't, we enter another error. And we're checking to see if the password and password confirmations are correct and they match each other. And if they don't, we submit another error, right? So at this point, if they have failed any of these validations, there's no point in continuing, because there's no point in connecting to our database. That's just wasted energy. There's no point in creating the SQL statement, because that's wasted energy and memory. There's no point in continuing whatsoever, right? Because they screwed up. So now we might as well just go back to the form and say, you screwed up. And here's what you made a mistake on, and this is the stuff you need to fix, right? So we're going to do that in step 5. We're going to return to the form if there are errors. We do this here because we don't want to run any malicious code against our database. Not that there'll be malicious code there at that point, but just in case. So the easiest way to do this is just to count the errors. If there are any errors whatsoever, then we know we need to go back. If there's no errors, then we know we're okay, right? So we do if count $errors is greater than 0, right? That makes sense. So if my array or my list or whatever you prefer to call it of errors has more than 0, then obviously there's an error. And hopefully that logic isn't too challenging. I don't think it is. So if that's the case, we're going to do a few steps. We are going to add the errors to our session flash. We are going to take whatever form data they submitted and send it back to them so that we can repopulate their form with that data, because nothing worse than filling out a massive form and then having to refill it out when you make a mistake. We're going to redirect them back to the form to go fix it. And then, very important, we're going to exit. And the reason why we have to exit is because when we redirect, our code on this page will continue to parse if we don't exit, which means we would accidentally write them to the database and all the rest of it, which we don't want to do. So let's start with step 1. We're going to create a new key under the flash, a little child key called danger. And you'll see soon why we're doing that. And we're going to make it equal to our errors array. So basically, we're taking all of our errors and we're shoving it into flash danger. Then we're going to add a new session key called form data. And we're going to make it equal to our post data. So basically, everything they submitted, we're just going to store under the session key and send it back at them. And then they can actually just deal with it. You can just deal with it. Then I want to redirect back to the page. So I use the function called header. And all this really does is set a header for the whole request. It just sets a header. And the header I'm going to set is a redirection, which is called location. So this is kind of odd looking. You do location colon space dot base path, which we're getting from our config file, slash users new dot PHP. So we're sending them right back to the new PHP page. And then super important, so our code doesn't continue to execute, we exit. Stops code from continuing to execute. And we save. Where are we at for time? 7:10. Okay, awesome. Now, what's going to happen is we're going to take all this session information, we're going to add our errors, we're going to add our form data, and then we're going to send them back to the page. But the issue we're going to have is that it's not going to matter because they're not going to see anything because we haven't actually implemented anything to look at this stuff. So, just out of curiosity, is anybody still typing before I move? We're good? Not good? You want me to just throw it into Slack? Yeah? Okay. Something I noticed, by the way, actually speaking of Slack, when I copy and paste information into Slack, it's doing something kind of bizarre. It takes all of the new lines, so basically anywhere there's a new line, it takes that new line and replaces it with a /r/n character, which your computers don't seem to interpret. And that's kind of a bad thing because it gives you an error, and then a lot of you are hitting that error and not understanding what it's doing. So we need to fix that. Users, hold on, let me finish writing this out, and then I'll say actual sentences with words in them. All right, so if you copy and paste this, anywhere there's a new line, you need to backspace the new line out and recreate it because it creates some sort of weird new line. All right. For everybody else, jump back over to your browser and go back to your form. So just hit your back button. And don't fill out anything whatsoever. Actually, let's make sure all the errors show up. So just fill out one of the password fields. Doesn't matter which password field. Just fill one of them out. All right, so I've got no first name, no last name, no email. The password is only this one filled out. This one's empty, which means empty, empty, empty. So that's 3. 4 empties. Don't match. That's 5 errors. And the email is not in the correct format because it's empty, so it's 6. I should get 6 errors altogether. So click submit, and it's going to bounce you back to the page, and you're not going to see anything. Trust me, there was an error. That's why we got redirected back to the page. But we can't see our error. So let's just do a very kind of dumbed down, super basic error show, okay? Let's jump over to our IDE. Open up new.php. Go to the very top of the file. Okay? And maybe just below the header.php, right here on line 9. Actually, no, we need to do it a step above that. Sorry, up here on line 3, we'll create an enter, and we'll spit it right here first. So we need to start our session. If we don't start our session, we can't access the session variables. So let's do get into the habit of writing this at all times. There we go. So if the session hasn't started already, then please start it. And then on line 10, we will var dump $_session. Actually, we'll just var dump _session, just so we can see everything inside of it. And there should only be 2 values in it right now. There should be the flash, which will contain all of our message data, and then there'll be the form itself will be in there. So we should be able to see all that stuff. And then make sure you save. Line 15. So once you've done that, so that's line 4 and line 10 is what you're adding. Once you've added those 2 lines, go back to your browser to that page and hit refresh, and you should see the var dump at the top of the page. And what you will see is a massive structure of just stuff. Good? Yes? I can jump over? Or are we still typing? Still typing? You have an error? Okay, just 1 minute. By the way, if you want to know how I manage to type this stuff as fast as I do, you know how when you're typing, it pops up a list? I use that list. I hit enter when it's highlighted the thing, so it puts it in. And then I do the next piece and I hit enter. And that's how I manage to type these things in like not even 2 seconds, right? It's because of that list. It makes it super, super helpful. All right, I'm going to jump over to the browser. I'm going to hit refresh, and you should see a giant block of data, except for the fellow over here got an error. This shows all the stuff that was in our form, right? It also shows stuff that we had in our session beforehand, from way before when we were playing with Superglobals. We still have name, age, color, and my Superglobal session gobbledygook. The thing I want to look at is this flash. So in the flash, I'll highlight just the flash, which obviously you can't read from there, but we'll zoom in a little bit. There we go. So there's our flash structure. So the flash is equal to another array. There's danger that we created, right? And then here's all of the errors that we plugged in. And we've got 6 errors altogether. It starts with index 0, but arrays start with a 0, right? But we've got 6 errors. First name cannot be empty. Last name cannot be empty. Email is not allowed to be empty. Password confirmation is not allowed to be empty. Your email is not in a valid format because blank is obviously not valid. And your password and password confirmation must match. So every single one of those errors actually worked out. If we scroll down a little further, we can see format data. So the format data, this is all of our form data: first name, last name, email, password, and password confirmation. That is the 5 fields. So why do we have this? It's because now we can take this data and repopulate our form with that data. So we can refill out the values they gave us, even if they're blank, right? But we can refill out the values they gave us and repopulate the form. So that's cool. We have all this stuff sitting in our session. Now, let's jump back to our IDE. Leave the if session status where it is for now. But line 10, we're going to get rid of line 10. We're going to get rid of the PHP var dump session. Okay. And then once you've done that, go back to your browser and refresh. And then all those error messages will disappear for now. Don't worry, they're still in the session. We still have them written there. We will get them back. Did your error go away when you got rid of that line? No? If it's not complicated, I'll fix it now, but if it is, then we'll have to wait. Sorry, what's your error here? You have a semicolon in, hold on, don't switch pages, on line 38. So go to line 38 of create.php. You have an error as well? Line 38. Errors, your email is not in valid format. You forgot to end the line with a semicolon. And then it's trying to jump to the next page. Refresh. If it's not. Oh, did you turn on the required? Yep, it's working. What's yours doing? Array push. Go back to your form. Go back to create.php. That's where the error is. Push error. Because you're pushing into error, and that's not the name of the variable. It's errors. Yeah, with an S. And then save it. And go make sure you didn't do it in other places. See, because we called it errors. So we called the array errors. And then you were pushing into error. You did there and the other place too. Yeah, all right. And then you need to get errors. Everything else looks correct. So save. Go back to your page. Just refresh. Resubmit the form. Hit continue. Okay. Undefined variable error on line 43. So let's go to line 43. 43. Yeah. Errors. Yeah. Save. Computers are super literal. If we define a variable as error, then we have to use errors. There you go. Did you figure out the problem, or? You have a semicolon. Can you load this page for me? Save and then load this page. Hit Control F. Go to the browser. Hit refresh. Hit continue. All right, cool. So unexpected errors on line 32. So let's go to line 32. Line 32 is formatted cannot be. Yeah, see how you're missing your semicolon right there. Yeah. So that's where it's kind of confusing. When you get that message, try looking at the code above it because it's usually a missing semicolon. So unexpected triple equals on line 4. Scroll up to line 4. Oh, and new.php on line 4. Yeah. So you said session status and then put the whole condition inside as an argument. It's not an argument. So take everything inside there. Yeah, and then just add get rid of the closing one there. Well, actually, you do need that one. Sorry, you need that one. Because that closes off the condition check. And then add the parentheses there. Nope, hold on, stop. There you go. Now save. Now go. And refresh. Hold on, go line 4. It's a different error this time. Session close. PHP session start. If session status equals session none. Oh yeah, you have an extra one. There you go. That's safe. Yeah, inline if conditions can throw people off. There you go. Yeah, and then you can get rid of the thing that's showing that, which is the var dump. All right. What's up?
I don't know. not showing the list over for her, the array.
Oh, okay. Don't fill out anything else. Stop. That's probably why. It's only going to show errors if you're missing things. So scroll down to the bottom and hit submit. Cool. Now we have an error. Let's go to create.php, line 114,
Empty.
because you wrote this word here. It probably came from Slack. I bet you. Save. Jump back to the browser. Hit refresh. Continue. There you go. Got everything. Awesome. All right. No. That's right.
This is not showing that first frame is empty, last frame is empty.
Did you fill out the form? I bet you filled out the form entirely. Just hit submit. Hit submit. It's working. What are you talking about? Enter a valid email. Password does not match. Oh, go back. Go back. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Something we hear.
If empty value.
Will this work like this in coded?
Yeah, that's exactly how it does it. And it's empty, not empty. But I don't see where this would be.
I just tried exactly what it was.
Closes. Save it? Because it looks like it's not saved. Go back.
Save all the files, maybe.
They're all saved. The other ones were. That one was not, though. Jump back. Refresh.
I tried it.
Danger equals rate. I don't know what's happening. Oh, no.
We can have a look.
It's doing something. Look at so you getting first name equals string. Oh, that's the form data. Yeah, let's look at it in a minute. We're gonna create the actual Flash data thing that shows it properly, and then we'll be able to go from there. Okay, so we still have another step. We need to actually see. We don't want to use var dump because var dump's kind of gross, and some of you, like those of you that have Macs that are running xstamp, yours doesn't spit out nicely formatted. There are ways to spit it out formatted, but it's tricky. All right. If you open your sidebar and you go to where it says partials, right, you'll see that I created a file in there called flash.php. So flash.php is what you're opening. Don't get excited. We're not drawing superheroes. I wish. We are going to create the Flash view. Hopefully we'll get this in this class. What time is it? 9:30? All right. So we're going to do this kind of a little bit on the lightning quick side. So below is our Flash. And it will iterate over the Flash data that we sent and then display it. Now, if you remember, our Flash data is kind of odd. Our Flash data is in a structure like this, right? So I have a bracket like so, Flash, right? And it is equal to an array, and in there I have danger, and then it is equal to an array, and then in there I have my messages, right? And then square bracket, square bracket. So it's an array within an array. So this nested array, which means I need to iterate 2 times in order to get all of the stuff out of this. You might be like, why did we call this danger instead of error? The reason we called it danger is because we're going to take advantage of a component that is built into Bootstrap. Bootstrap actually has this alert, and we can use the alert in order to color our actual notifications. The alert for errors is called danger, and we're actually going to use that word in order to trigger it. Successes are successes. There's also info, warning, primary, secondary. There's a whole bunch of them that you can see on the Bootstrap website. So, step 1, check if the variable flash data is set and has data, because if there's no data in it, then we're not going to do anything with it. So we're going to say if not empty, $ flash underscore data, which we will define in another file. And that's going to create our fancy brackets. I'm going to take the closing fancy bracket and put it down here, though. There. So if empty flash data, right? So if it's not empty, then I'm going to go with my for each loop. So for each $ flash data, which will contain that structure, as $type and $messages. So messages will be the array that contains all of our data, like all of our actual error messages. Type will be the type. So if I have success messages, danger messages, and info messages, then I will wind up with 3 separated blocks based on the type block. So I need to echo the opening and closing div tags. So we're going to actually write HTML right inside here. And this div tag is going to have a class with alert and alert dash. And then this is a little tricky because we're going to use concatenation in line here. $type. So that will create the actual styling for us. So what this will result in is it will be div class alert dash danger, or alert dash success, or alert dash info, alert dash warn. And then I'll write the closing div down here so I don't forget it. Whoops. Need to put it in actual string. There we go. And then I'm ready to actually write the error message, or just the messages in general. I need to iterate through them. So for each $messages as $message echo. And what we'll do is we'll actually echo out the message itself and a break tag so that it breaks to the next line. That is the complete Flash notifier. I didn't write this in the notes, but we do stand a potential chance of something going wrong. If for some reason Flash data is not defined, we're going to wind up getting an error back. So what we need to do is basically have a fail-safe for that so that we don't wind up with an error. I think we'll write it in a very nice, clean way that's easily readable. However, we could do it just inline inside the empty if we wanted to. Basically, just before the if condition, we're going to write $flash data equals either $flash data or null. And then what that will do is if flash data is not defined, it will assign null to it, so it essentially becomes defined, even though it has a null value in it. All right, I'm going to erase this thing because it's confusing for the other side. All right. Just out of curiosity, who's still typing, just so I know. Are you still typing, Hedy? Or you... Okay. Wait a second then. Where are you at? Do you want me to copy and paste it? Yeah? There you go. All right, we're still not going to see anything. There's no session data because, one, we put that in a different file and we're not including that file anywhere. And two, we're not taking our session values and assigning it to that flash data variable that we need to. In order to fix that, we need to open up the header.php file. And in our header.php file, this is where we're actually going to deal with all that type of stuff. So open up header.php, and then the first thing we're going to do, we're going to write that session variable starter that we need, which is if session underscore status equals php underscore session none. See how it's popping up, and I'm just literally typing it as it does that, and then I just hit tab and it fills it. There we go, our session is started, if it hasn't already been started. So the next thing I want to do is I want to assign the flash data from the session data. So I'm going to say $flash underscore data is equal to $underscore session flash or null. So almost kind of the same thing that we wrote at the top of the flash partial, but also in here as well. Might seem redundant, but just in case we accidentally forget and try to include the flash somewhere, then we're covered from two sides. And then the last thing, which might seem counterintuitive, is the reason why we call this a flash. This data is only to live once it has been seen. So once you can visualize that session data, you no longer need to see it. Only the one time. To make sure that happens, I need to clear this session flash. I need to get rid of the data that's inside of it. And the easiest way to do that is to unset the session data. So we're going to unset $underscore session flash. So let's walk through those steps again. First, I start the session if it hasn't already been started. Then I take the flash data if there is any, and I assign it to flash data, the new variable, or I assign null. And then lastly, I unset the flash data. If there is no flash data, that's fine. Unset will still execute and it won't do anything, right? So we don't have to worry about covering this. We do have to worry about covering that. So cool. So our flash data is in the flash data variable. We have a flash data partial, right? Now all we have to do is include the partial on the page, which makes sense to put it in the header because that's where it should go. And then our flash data will show up wherever we want. The reason why we're putting it in the header is because the header, I feel like I'm just talking over top of like 10 people. By putting it in the header, then we guarantee that it's at the top of the page of every single page in our application. Makes sense, right? So that anywhere in our application, we can create a flash message and spit it out. Doesn't matter where we are. That's the whole reason for putting it there. All right. That's the header.php file. I have to see what you're typing. What application are you using? Adam?
No. Right.
What is it? Brackets?
Ah, okay.
All right. When we're done, we're going to switch you over to VS Code. Make your life a lot easier and make your programming a lot faster. I'm going to copy this for you just so that you're not waiting. Just because we got a lot to cover and we can't be too far behind. That's just the top part here, Haiti. Okay? No worries. So from lines 1 to 13 is what you're replacing. So the last piece that we need to do, actually it's already been done for you. On line 28, you should have this line. If you don't, you need to add it. But I'm pretty sure everybody has it. Do you have it? Line 28? You closed everything out. You're like ready to go. You've got it. So that's all that matters. No worries. Okay, now here's the thing. If we go back to our browser, we only get one refresh. The second we refresh, we're hoping those flash notifications show up because they're going to clear out the second we refresh, right? Because that's what our code states here. It says to assign them off to the flash data variable and then unset the flash. Remember, only session variables persist for the whole thing. And we're unsetting it, so that data's gone. I'm going to go to my browser. I'm going to hit refresh. And there we go. I get message, 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 which means I definitely did something wrong. All right. I'm going to jump back over to my IDE. And it likely is under underscore flash.php. Sure enough, that's not a variable. That's just a word. So let's add a $sign in front of message, and now it's a variable. I tend to make mistakes like that because I code in about 5 languages in a day, and they kind of blend together in my head sometimes. Between JavaScript, Ruby, PHP in this class, and 5 different database languages. Yeah, it gets a little bit muddled. All right. Are we good? Did everybody add their $sign? Yes? Now if I jump over and refresh, all of our flash messages are gone because we had unset them. So that's fine. All I need to do is just resubmit this form, which is exactly what I'm going to do. Submit. Boom. There we go. There's our error messages in nice big red. First name cannot be empty. Last name cannot be empty. Email can't be empty. Neither can the passwords. They have to match, and your email is not in a valid format. That's a lot of errors, yes. You're getting the bar dump still, or? Oh, you just get a whole whack of errors? Okay. Let me just finish off this statement then. I think that's actually a good place to stop to deal with just some of the errors that people are having on their pages. Not a big deal. We didn't get our create done, but we're at roughly the same spot that Tuesday and Wednesday are at anyways. So that's fine. Next week, we are going to quickly finish off the create script so we can create a user. We are going to write edit. We are going to write update and destroy, which might be ambitious to get all 3 of those done in one class, but we will see where we get to. No huge rush. We have 2 filler classes at the end of this semester that we can completely scrap and destroy if we need to. So hopefully we'll get where we need to be. All right. I'm going to stop this video and then I'll come around and help.